There is a figure in the 10th chapter of Daniel who appears before Michael is mentioned. He stands beside the Tigris. His body is like beryl. His face is like lightning. His eyes are like torches of fire. His arms and legs gleam like polished bronze. His voice is like the sound of a multitude. Daniel sees him and falls on his face. He cannot stand. The men with Daniel cannot see what Daniel sees, but they feel it. They scatter, they run, they hide. Daniel is left alone on the riverbank, drained of strength, barely breathing. And then this figure speaks. He tells Daniel that he has been held back, that for 21 days, 3 full weeks, he was prevented from coming, opposed by a figure the text calls the Prince of Persia. He tells Daniel that Michael came to help him, and that Michael's arrival was what finally broke the deadlock. The figure is not identified. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how Michael is introduced in Daniel 10, what his named arrival reveals about the celestial hierarchy the text assumes without explaining, and why he arrives as reinforcement for a figure the text declines to name. What the war scroll from Qumran, written in a different century by a different community, adds to that portrait is the same structural logic, the same precision, a different text. If the most recognizable angel in Western culture appears in Scripture not as a conqueror, but as reinforcement for a figure the text declines to name, then the image popular tradition inherited is not a simplification of what the texts describe. It is a replacement. Understanding what was replaced is what this channel was built to do. There is a figure in Daniel 10 who appears before Michael is mentioned, who speaks to Daniel, who is already in conflict with the Prince of Persia, and whom the text never identifies. Michael is sent to help this figure, not to lead. Hold who the unnamed figure is. Daniel 10 opens not with a victory but with a delay, a celestial messenger held back for 21 days by the Prince of Persia. By the end of this chapter, you will understand the celestial conflict structure the text assumes without explaining, and why the first thing it says about Michael is not that he won. The 10th chapter of Daniel is not well known outside scholarship. It sits between the vision of the ram and the goat in chapter 8 and the timeline of the 70 weeks in chapter 9, and it opens with a date. The 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. This is approximately 536 BCE. If you accept the text's own chronological frame, Daniel has been mourning and fasting for 3 full weeks. He has not eaten, he has not bathed, he has not anointed himself with oil. He is standing beside the great river, the Hiddekel, which the text identifies as the Tigris, when the figure appears. The description in Daniel 10:5-6 is one of the most sustained theophanic descriptions in the Hebrew prophetic literature. A man clothed in linen, his waist girded with fine gold, his body like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like lamps of fire, his arms and his feet like the color of polished bronze, and his voice like the voice of a multitude. The effect on Daniel is total and immediate. His strength leaves him. His color turns to corruption. He retains no strength at all. The men with him scatter. Daniel writes that they did not see the vision, but a great quaking fell on them, and they ran to hide themselves. Daniel is left alone. This overpowering is not incidental to the scene. It is structural. The response Daniel has to this figure, the prostration, the loss of strength, the speechlessness, is the same response that appears across the Hebrew prophetic corpus, wherever a being of extraordinary celestial rank comes into direct contact with a human. Ezekiel falls on his face before the divine throne chariot. Isaiah is undone. The function of the response is to mark the category of what Daniel is encountering before the text names it. When the figure then reaches out and touches Daniel, lifts him to his hands and knees, speaks to him, touches him again, and strengthens him. This pattern of prostration, touch, and restoration is not incidental either. It is the sequence by which prophetic literature signals that the human has been prepared to receive what is about to be communicated. Daniel is not merely frightened. He has been reconfigured for the encounter. What the figure says to Daniel in verses 10 through 14 is where the chapter becomes theologically significant, and where the conventional portrait of Michael begins to come apart. The figure tells Daniel that his words were heard from the first day Daniel set his heart to understand and to humble himself, from the first day, not from the moment the figure arrived. He was already on his way. Something stopped him. Daniel 10:13. And he says, "But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days." 21 days, not a hesitation, not a journey, a resistance. The prince of Persia opposed him for 21 days, and he could not get through until Michael came. This is the first thing the text says about Michael, not that he won, that he arrived and that was enough. The verse continues, "But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia." Michael is described in two ways in this single clause. He is named, and he is described as one of the chief princes. Not the chief prince, not the supreme commander, but one of a ranked set. What the text has now done, without pausing to explain, is revealed the existence of a cosmological structure that treats geopolitical reality as the surface layer of a deeper conflict. The Persian Empire, the dominant world power at the moment Daniel is writing, has a celestial counterpart. That counterpart is called a prince. He has sufficient power to block an unnamed radiant figure for 3 full weeks. He is not a symbol. He is a contender. John J. Collins, in his Hermenia, commentary on Daniel, describes this structure as the assumption of a divided cosmos, a framework in which nations exist not only in historical space, but as positions within a celestial hierarchy, each assigned a corresponding divine figure whose conflicts map onto the conflicts of the nations they correspond to. Collins traces this pattern in Second Temple literature broadly, but notes that Daniel 10 is among the most structurally explicit statements of it in the Hebrew canon. The princes are not metaphors for political forces. They are the cosmological architecture that political forces run on. The text names 2 of these princes in the immediate context: the Prince of Persia, who resisted, and in verse 20, the Prince of Greece, who the figure tells Daniel is coming next, after the Prince of Persia has been dealt with. The sequence is not accidental. Persia was the dominant empire at the narrative moment Daniel is describing. Greece, under Alexander was the empire that replaced it. The text is not predicting this succession so much as it is framing it within its own cosmological logic. The empires that rise and fall in human history correspond to a sequence of celestial prince conflicts that precede and produce those changes in the register Daniel's vision briefly opens. Human history is not self-caused on this reading. It is the visible surface of a structure that runs at a deeper level. The pattern is consistent. Each empire has a celestial counterpart, and Michael is Israel's. But Israel's is not quite the word the text uses. It uses your people, Daniel's people. And it does not describe Michael as a patron or a protector in the devotional sense. It describes him as the one sent as reinforcement to break a 3-week deadlock. He is a ranked contender in a hierarchy of celestial princes, and his function in this scene is not to lead a victory. It is to allow one. It is worth pausing here on the setting Daniel has established before any of this begins. The 3rd year of Cyrus is not an arbitrary date. It is a moment of political transition. Cyrus is the Persian king who issued the edict permitting the Jewish exiles to return to Judah, and whose reign represents, from the perspective of the text, the beginning of the restoration period. Daniel is mourning. The text does not say why, but the scholars who work on this unit generally read the mourning as connected to the situation of Daniel's people under the continuing realities of Persian rule, and perhaps to an apprehension about what the visionary material he has been receiving means for the future. He is in a state of heightened spiritual attention, not merely religious observance, but the kind of sustained, deliberate preparation that in the prophetic literature typically precedes a major revelatory encounter. The 3-week fast, running exactly parallel to the 3-week delay of the celestial messenger, is one of the more precise structural details of the chapter. Daniel is fasting in the human register for exactly as long as the unnamed figure is blocked in the celestial one. The text does not comment on this alignment. It simply presents it, whether the parallelism is intentional within the narrative. Whether Daniel's physical preparation corresponds in some way to the celestial conflict that is occurring simultaneously is a question the text raises by its construction and declines to answer. What it establishes is that the celestial and human registers of this story are running in parallel from the moment the chapter begins. The unnamed figure, who has been speaking this entire time, is still unidentified. He has told Daniel about the delay, about Michael's arrival, and about his own continuing mission among the kings of Persia. He will appear again in this chapter, and again in chapter 11, a sustained presence through the entire vision sequence, never named, never explained. The text never names him. Hold who he is. Chapter 1 has established what follows: the celestial conflict structure. Daniel 10 assumes is not a metaphor and not an ornament. It is a cosmological claim that specific named princes govern specific named empires and contend with each other in a register that runs parallel to and prior to the register of human history. Michael's position inside that system is precisely described. One of the chief princes, the one whose arrival broke a 3-week deadlock, not the apex and not yet a conqueror. And the most immediately available explanation for all of this is that Michael is simply Israel's divine patron. Nothing more structurally interesting than that. A celestial ambassador for one particular people, doing what patron deities do, showing up when their people need them. The reading of Michael as Israel's national patron has genuine ancient Near Eastern roots and a straightforward reading of the text on its side. By the end of this chapter, you will understand why the text's own structural details push past that reading. The idea that nations have divine patrons is not a late theological invention. It is one of the oldest political religious frameworks in the ancient Near East, and it was familiar to any Second Temple Jewish reader in ways that require no special explanation. Deuteronomy 32, 8-9, in its Dead Sea Scrolls version, which preserves what most scholars now consider the more original reading, describes the Most High dividing the nations and assigning them according to the number of the sons of God, while keeping Israel as his own portion. The nations have divine overseers. Israel has a special relationship with the divine itself. This framework has deep roots. The ancient Near Eastern world was organized, politically and theologically, around the assumption that divine beings governed nations the way kings governed territories. Marduk governed Babylon, Chemosh governed Moab, Asher governed Assyria. Each of these patron deities was understood not merely as an object of worship for their people, but as the celestial guarantor of their people's standing, prosperity, and survival. When Babylon defeated Judah and destroyed the first temple, the theological question that required an answer was not simply, why did this happen? It was, what does this mean about the relative standing of Marduk and the God of Israel? The prophetic literature of the exile grapples with exactly this question in numerous places. Michael fits this pattern exactly. He is the prince assigned to Israel. He shows up when Israel's representative is in need. He intervenes at the geopolitical level by helping the messenger break through Persian celestial resistance. The reading is coherent, it is historically situated, and it is supported by the plain reading of Daniel 10:21, where the figure tells Daniel, "There is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael your prince." Your prince. The pronoun is possessive. The framing is relational. A national patron, a divine advocate, a celestial guarantor of Israel's standing in a world governed by imperial power. This is not an absurd reading. Some scholars do treat Michael primarily through this lens. As the angelic equivalent of the national deities that surrounded Israel throughout its history, doing for Israel what Marduk did for Babylon or Chemosh for Moab. The comfortable version of the story ends there. Israel has an angel. The angel is Michael, and the celestial conflict language is a poetic way of describing geopolitical pressure, not a claim about the structure of reality. And then the text gets in the way of its own comfortable reading. A guardian angel does not require a named reinforcement to break a 3-week deadlock. The structure of Daniel 10:13 is not a figure who was overwhelmed and needed rescue. It is a figure who was held in a state of resistance by a counterpart of roughly comparable power, who required the arrival of a second-ranked entity to shift the balance. The Prince of Persia did not overpower the unnamed figure. He held him in place for 21 days. The resolution came not because Michael is stronger than the unnamed figure. It came because two ranked celestial contenders together outweigh one. The mechanics here matter. What the text is describing is not a patron deity who happens to be delayed. It is a standoff. Two celestial powers of roughly equivalent rank, locked against each other, neither able to break the deadlock alone. The arrival of Michael is not the arrival of a reinforcing patron. It is the arrival of a third party whose rank is sufficient to shift the balance. The system the text assumes is not a system of patron deities watching over their respective peoples. It is a system of ranked celestial officers whose conflicts over the heavenly representation of nations determine the trajectory of those nations' histories. The Prince of Persia did not fight Michael and lose. He was outweighed by the combined presence of two chief princes, where he had previously been holding one alone. This is not a guardian angel dynamic. This is a structure of ranked offices with named adversaries, in which the celestial conflict over Persia is a tactical problem requiring coordinated response. The figure who has been speaking to Daniel is not being protected by Michael. He is being reinforced. The distinction matters because it tells you what kind of system the text assumes it is describing. Daniel 10:13 also describes Michael as one of the chief princes, not the chief prince of Israel. One of the chief princes, a title that implies a set. A set implies a rank structure. A rank structure implies that Michael's position within it is defined not just by his relationship to Israel, but by his standing among others who hold the same order of title. The national patron reading cannot account for this. A patron deity does not hold a ranked office within a hierarchy of peers. A patron deity has a relationship with its people. Michael is described here as having a position in a structure that includes the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece as peers within it, each governing a comparable celestial jurisdiction, each contending with or against the others as the structure requires. John J. Collins, in the Apocalyptic Imagination, situates this passage within the broader Second Temple angelological development, a period in which what had been vague language about divine beings serving the heavenly court began to crystallize into named, ranked, functionally specific offices. Daniel is not the origin of this development, but it is one of its clearest expressions in the Hebrew canon. The prince structure in Daniel 10 is not an elaboration of the patron deity model. It is a replacement of it with something architecturally different, a cosmology in which celestial beings hold offices that correspond to geopolitical realities, and in which those offices are ranked against each other in ways that require coordination, reinforcement, and response. The difference between a patron deity and a ranked celestial officer is not merely semantic. A patron deity's authority is relational. It derives from the bond between deity and people. A ranked celestial officer's authority is structural. It derives from position within a hierarchy that exists independently of any particular people's devotion. Michael Heiser, in The Unseen Realm, frames this structure in terms of what he calls the divine council worldview, the assumption running through substantial portions of the Hebrew Bible, that the divine governs not as a solitary sovereign, but through a structured court of ranked beings with specific jurisdictions. In Heiser's reading, what Daniel 10 describes is a bureaucratic reality, not a metaphorical one. The chief princes are office holders. Michael is one of them. His jurisdiction is Israel, but his nature is defined by his rank within the council, not solely by his relationship to one people. Heiser's framing has been influential, with exactly the kind of audience this channel draws. Readers who are already familiar with the divine council concept and who recognize in Daniel 10 a text that makes the council's structure unusually explicit. There is also a historical dimension to the patron deity reading that deserves honest acknowledgement before the argument moves past it. The Second Temple period was a time of intense theological pressure on Jewish communities living under successive foreign empires, Persian, Greek, and eventually Roman. The theological question of why Israel's God would permit continued foreign domination was not an abstract one. It was a lived crisis. The doctrine of national patron angels was, among other things, a theological answer to that crisis. The nations had their celestial advocates, and so did Israel. The contest was not over. Michael was still there. That this was a theologically necessary claim does not make it false. But it does mean that the patron angel framework served a function beyond pure cosmological description. The comfort the reading offered, Israel has a champion in the celestial hierarchy, and that champion intervenes on its behalf, is real. What it cannot fully account for is the text's insistence on specifying where Michael stands within the hierarchy rather than simply asserting that he stands for Israel. The text's own choice of terminology makes this explicit in a way that is easy to overlook on a single reading. The phrase translated "one of the chief princes" in Daniel 10:13 uses the Hebrew sar, the same word used for the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece. Michael holds the same order of title as Israel's celestial adversaries. He is not a patron deity in relationship to Israel's enemies' patron deities. He is a ranked officer in the same hierarchy that the Prince of Persia occupies. The system they both belong to is not a system of competing national religions. It is a single hierarchical structure in which specific offices are assigned to specific jurisdictions, and in which the holders of those offices operate according to the logic of rank, coordination, and assigned adversaries rather than the logic of national devotion. Michael is Israel's assigned officer. The Prince of Persia is Persia's. They contend not as rivals in a religious competition, but as ranked celestial officers whose conflict is determined by their positions in a structure that contains both of them. It is worth noting what this framing does to the traditional idea of divine favoritism. If Michael and the Prince of Persia are both sar, both holders of equivalent order offices within the same cosmological hierarchy, then the celestial conflict Daniel 10 describes is not a contest between Israel's God and Persia's God. It is an internal conflict within a single hierarchical system, adjudicated by rank and resolved by reinforcement. The question the text is interested in is not which nation's deity is stronger. It is which ranked officer, in which position, with which ally, holds the balance at a given moment in the celestial contest, whose surface expression is the rise and fall of human empires. Michael matters not because he is Israel's and Israel is special, but because he is precisely positioned and precisely ranked within a system that does not play favorites, it plays structure. This is what the text is actually describing. Not a patron, not a mascot, not a celestial version of Chemosh, who simply happens to be on Israel's side. A named, ranked, precisely located chief prince whose defining action in this text is not victory, but reinforcement. Arriving to break a 3-week standoff that an unnamed figure of extraordinary power could not break alone. What the first 2 chapters of this video have assembled is not a story about Israel's special relationship with a protective angel. It is a text that assumes, without explaining, that human empires have celestial counterparts who contend against each other in a hierarchy of named princes. And that Michael's position in that hierarchy is precisely defined, not vaguely heroic. The second half of this video asks what that definition amounts to across 2 different stages of the same apocalyptic tradition. And defining Michael's position means accounting for a figure the text has been withholding for 21 verses. The named office inside a ranked hierarchy has now displaced the patron angel reading, which means the unnamed figure who required Michael's reinforcement is positioned somewhere in that hierarchy too. And the text is still not saying who he is. Whatever his rank is, it is significant enough that his 3-week delay required a chief prince to resolve. Michael was sent to help him, not to lead. The question of who receives that help is the structural question the text has been constructing since verse 5. The unnamed radiant figure in Daniel 10 is a genuine, unresolved scholarly question. Not an oversight in the text, but a deliberate withholding. By the end of this chapter, you will understand the scholarly debate and what the text's silence actually reveals about the hierarchy it describes. The unnamed figure is still unnamed. He appeared in verse 5. He has been speaking to Daniel since verse 10. He will reappear in verses 16 and 18, and he will continue speaking into chapter 11. Daniel 10 never gives him a name. This is not a gap in the text. It is a feature of it. The scholarly positions on the unnamed figure's identity fall into 3 main clusters, and they do not resolve into consensus. The first and most significant position is that the figure is a theophany, an appearance of the divine itself. The description in verses 5 and 6 draws heavily on the imagery of Ezekiel 1, which is the throne chariot vision, and on Daniel 7's Ancient of Days. The beryl body, the lightning face, the voice of a multitude. These are not typical angelic descriptors in the Hebrew prophetic corpus. They are markers of divine presence. The figure in Ezekiel's chariot vision is not described as an angel. He is described as the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. The description in Daniel 10 echoes that visual register closely enough that some interpreters give serious weight to a theophanic reading, treating the figure not as a senior angelic messenger, but as a manifestation of divine presence operating through the logic of heavenly agency. If this reading is correct, then the 3-week resistance of the Prince of Persia is not merely a contest between two ranked angels. It is a resistance that required a chief prince's intervention to overcome. And Michael's arrival is the arrival of the specific officer whose rank and assignment made him the right instrument for this particular impasse. The second position is that the unnamed figure is a high-ranking angelic being, distinct from both Michael and Gabriel. Possibly a figure the text has no need to name, because its original audience would have known who held this office. This reading preserves the hierarchical logic of the chapter. A ranked angel, senior to Michael in this context, held in a state of deadlock, requiring reinforcement from a chief prince. Under this reading, Michael is unambiguously subordinate, not the apex of the celestial hierarchy, but one of its ranked contenders, deployed to break a specific tactical impasse on behalf of a figure whose authority exceeds his own. The title, "One of the Chief Princes," then takes on its full weight. Michael is among the highest tier of named celestial officers, but he is not its singular apex. There is a figure above him in this vision, and the text declines to name that figure. The third position, raised in the scholarship and usually treated as secondary, notes the parallel to Gabriel's appearance in Daniel 8:15-16. In that earlier chapter, Gabriel is described as appearing in the form of a man and is sent to explain a vision to Daniel. The function is comparable. A figure arrives in response to Daniel's need with information the prophet requires. Some scholars have suggested that the unnamed figure in chapter 10 is Gabriel, his name simply withheld, and that the two chapters together describe Gabriel as Michael's senior in the hierarchy of chief princes. This reading has not achieved scholarly consensus, in part because the descriptions of the two figures are not identical. Gabriel's appearance in chapter 8 does not produce the total prostration and loss of strength that the chapter 10 figure produces. And the structural function is different enough that the parallel, while worth noting, does not constitute identification. But the reading is present in the scholarly literature, and it is mentioned here because it represents the most specific attempt to resolve the text's ambiguity, rather than simply holding it open. What all three positions share is the same structural consequence for understanding Michael's rank. Whoever the unnamed figure is, Michael is explicitly positioned as his reinforcement. One of the chief princes is not a title of supremacy. It is a title of office within a ranked set. The figure who needed Michael's help holds a position at least coordinate with, and in at least one reading above, Michael in that set. The text is not vague about this. It introduces Michael precisely as one who came to help. Not one who arrived to lead, not one who was dispatched as the primary actor, but the specific officer whose arrival resolved a standoff that the unnamed figure could not resolve alone. Daniel 10:21 closes the chapter with the figure telling Daniel, "But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael your prince." This is often read as a statement of Michael's unique relationship to Israel. It is also a statement of isolation. The figure who is speaking has one ally in the celestial conflict over Persia, and that ally is Michael. The phrasing, "none that holdeth with me," implies a sustained engagement, not a single intervention. Michael is not merely the officer who broke the original deadlock. He is the ongoing ally, the one who continues to stand with this figure in a conflict that Daniel 10 frames as still active, still requiring coordinated response, still unresolved in the celestial register, even as the human empire of Persia continues to exist in the historical one. The phrase also implies a cost. If the unnamed figure's only ally among the chief princes is Michael, then the structure the text describes is not one in which the celestial forces aligned with Israel hold overwhelming numerical superiority over those aligned with Persia and Greece. The Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece are still active. The unnamed figure is holding a position in their territory with one ally. The portrait the text builds is not one of celestial triumph. It is one of ongoing, costly, precisely contested engagement. A balance of forces in which the specific ranked positions of specific named officers determine outcomes that the text consistently refuses to describe in terms of easy victory. This is what the text is describing when it introduces Michael for the first time. Not the singular apex of the heavenly hierarchy, not the supreme commander of the angelic host, a named, ranked, precisely located chief prince, one of them, sent to resolve a deadlock that a figure of comparable or greater rank could not resolve alone, and who remains as that figure's sole ally in a continuing celestial contest, whose surface expression is still playing out in the empires, whose histories Daniel's vision is about to describe in detail. Daniel 10's portrait of Michael is now complete. A ranked celestial contender, introduced as one of the chief princes, whose first recorded action is the resolution of a 3-week deadlock that an unnamed figure of extraordinary power could not resolve alone. Named, precisely located, assigned a specific adversary. Operating inside a cosmological structure that treats geopolitical conflict as the surface manifestation of something happening simultaneously in another register. Later, in the Judean desert, a sectarian community was still working from the same map. The Dead Sea Scroll, known as the War Scroll, 1QM, describes an eschatological battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, with Michael named as the commander of the light side forces. By the end of this chapter, you will understand what the War Scroll adds to the Daniel portrait and why their structural continuity across 2 different stages of the same apocalyptic tradition carries weight. The War Scroll was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran and is dated by most scholars to the late Second Temple period, probably around the 1st century BCE. That places it after the Danielic traditions in their final literary form. Mainstream scholarship dates the composition and final redaction of Daniel's apocalyptic sections, including chapters 10 to 12, to the 2nd century BCE, and long after the 6th century narrative setting Daniel gives itself. Its community, the Yahad, was a sectarian Jewish group that had separated from the Jerusalem temple establishment and was living in a disciplined community near the Dead Sea. Their theology was shaped by a profound dualism. The world is divided between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, and the conflict between them is total structured, and moving toward a final resolution. Carol Newsom, in the Self as Symbolic Space, situates the war scroll within the Qumran community's broader project of constructing identity through ritual and cosmic participation. The scroll is not merely a description of an eschatological battle. It is a document that positions the community itself as participants in that battle, as the earthly counterpart to the celestial forces of light. Their liturgy, their discipline, their hierarchy within the community are all reflections of the celestial order they believe themselves to be aligned with. The War Scroll's cosmology is not abstract. It is inhabited. The community reading this scroll understood themselves to be living in the period described. The final conflict between light and darkness was not a future projection, but an ongoing reality in which they were already engaged, on the right side of a line that the scroll defines with absolute precision. This is why the scroll's procedural specificity matters. The column formations, the trumpet signals, the named angels on the standards are not literary decoration. They are the operational details of a real order of battle that the community believed itself to be part of in the earthly register at the very moment the scroll was being read. Michael appears in the War Scroll as the Prince of Light, the celestial commander of the Sons of Light against Belial, who leads the Sons of Darkness. Belial, as the named adversary of the light side forces, is established ground from this channel's earlier treatment of the War Scroll's priestly dimensions. What the scroll adds here is not Belial's identity, but Michael's function within the military structure that the scroll describes with unusual procedural specificity. The War Scroll does not describe a metaphor. It describes an order of battle, column formations, trumpet signals, the names of angels inscribed on the standards. Michael's name is there, not as a symbol, as a commander with a position in a line. The scroll describes in considerable detail the organization of the battle, the arrangement of the infantry, the cavalry positions, the role of the priests at specific phases of the engagement, the signals given by trumpets at each stage. It names the angels inscribed on the banners of the various units, on the standards of the whole congregation, on the towers, on the gates of the camps. The level of procedural detail is not decorative. It reflects a theological conviction that the celestial order is structured with the same precision that the community applied to its own organization, and that the battle being described operates according to rules that can be specified, documented, and prepared for. The 7-phase structure of the battle, 3 phases won by the Sons of Light, 3 won by the Sons of Darkness, and the 7th decided by divine intervention, is itself a theological statement. The Sons of Light do not win easily or completely on their own. The Sons of Darkness are not simply swept aside. The conflict is real, the resistance is real, and the final resolution requires something beyond human or even standard angelic capacity to achieve. Michael's role as commander of the light side forces does not spare his side from genuine contest. It places him as the officer responsible for prosecuting a battle, whose outcome is ultimately determined by forces above even him. What this structure does for Michael is identical to what Daniel 10 does for him. It places him in a hierarchy with a named adversary, assigns him a specific office within a ranked system, and describes his function in terms of coordinated, structured engagement rather than individual heroism. He is not simply the strongest angel, he is the commander assigned to a specific side of a specific eschatological conflict, the celestial mirror of the community's own position in the world. He holds a named rank in a system that extends above him to the divine itself, and below him to the earthly community whose cosmic alignment the scroll is documenting. The consistency between Daniel 10 and the War Scroll is not a matter of the War Scroll simply copying Daniel's terminology, though it is worth noting that Daniel manuscripts were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Yahad community was working within a Danielic and apocalyptic world of thought. That connection is precisely the point. The Michael tradition did not vanish after Daniel. It was preserved, sharpened, and militarized in sectarian, apocalyptic literature. Two texts from different communities working within the same inherited tradition both describe Michael in recognizably similar structural terms: a named office, a named adversary, a precise rank within a hierarchy, a function defined by coordination rather than singular supremacy. That is what the preservation of a tradition looks like. Not identical wording, but a repeated structure, applied consistently across different genres and different centuries. Daniel 12 adds one more element that neither the War Scroll nor Daniel 10 fully develops: a promise. Daniel 12:1, reached as the natural conclusion of the Daniel 10 to 12 unit, makes a specific promise about Michael's future action. By the end of this chapter, you will understand what the text says, and that this episode will not unpack what it means. Daniel 12:1 reads, "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was, since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book." The verse is the conclusion of the extended vision unit that began in Daniel 10. It is also, in its context, a natural endpoint for the portrait of Michael that the earlier chapters established. The ranked chief prince of chapter 10, introduced as one among others, and described primarily by what his arrival enabled rather than what he achieved alone, is now given a title that the earlier chapters withheld: the Great Prince. Not one of the chief princes, the Great Prince. The definite article matters. The shift from one of to the is a shift from office within a ranked set to a singular designation. And whatever that shift means, the text does not explain it. It simply makes it. At the moment, it turns from Michael's present function to Michael's future action. What stand up means in verse 1 is genuinely contested in the scholarship. The phrase in Hebrew is ya'amad. It can describe rising to take action, standing in a legal posture as an advocate, assuming a throne, or the specific eschatological posture of a figure who acts at a time of crisis. Collins notes that the phrase carries both military and legal registers in its Second Temple contexts. Which register applies here depends in part on how one reads the broader eschatological framework of Daniel 10 to 12. What that time maps onto, how it relates to the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel 9, how it connects to the 70 generations framework in 1st Enoch, and what, written in the book, implies about the structure of eschatological judgment. Those are not questions this episode can answer, because they require more than a single chapter's treatment to handle fairly. Daniel 12 is not the answer to this episode. It is the doorway out of it. This episode has asked where Michael stands inside the hierarchy. Daniel 12 asks, what happens when that ranked officer finally stands up? Those are not the same question. And this episode has earned the right to leave the second question exactly where the text leaves it: present, specific, and unresolved. What this episode notes is that the promise exists, that it follows directly from the portrait Daniel 10 established, and that Michael's future action is described in the same text that first introduced him as one of the chief princes. The ranked contender in Daniel 10 and the great prince of Daniel 12 are the same figure, and the distance between those two descriptions is the distance the tradition has to travel before his story is finished. Two texts, two communities, one structural memory, and between them, a portrait of Michael that later popular tradition rarely preserved. Here is what Daniel 10 says. A celestial messenger, unnamed, of extraordinary appearance, was held in resistance by the Prince of Persia for 21 days. He could not break through alone. Michael arrived. That was enough. The text describes Michael's arrival not as a triumph, but as a resolution. The resistance ended. The messenger could continue. Daniel received his vision. This is the first thing any text in the Hebrew prophetic canon says about Michael. Not that he leads, not that he wins, that he arrived, and that was enough to shift the balance. Here is what Daniel 10 also says. Michael is one of the chief princes, one of a ranked set, each assigned to a specific empire, each a named contender in a structure the text assumes without explaining. The Prince of Persia, the Prince of Greece, and Michael, not the prince of a nation in the patron deity sense, but the holder of a named office inside a hierarchy that treats geopolitical conflict as the surface layer of something happening in another register entirely. Here is what the unnamed figure's position reveals. Whatever he is, a theophany, a senior angelic officer, a figure the text's original audience would have recognized by role, if not by name, Michael is his reinforcement. One of the chief princes is not a title of supremacy. The structure Michael operates in has a figure above him, or coordinate with him, who required his help. The hierarchy is real, it is ranked, and Michael's position within it is precise. He is not at the apex. Here is what Daniel 12 gestures at but does not unpack. There is a future moment in which Michael acts. The text calls him the Great Prince, which standeth for the children of Daniel's people. It describes a time of unprecedented trouble and a deliverance that follows. What that promise means, what standing up entails, what the eschatological framework it belongs to actually claims. Those questions have an episode of their own, and they are not this episode's to answer. Here is what the War Scroll says. Later in the War Scroll, a community in the Judean desert was still describing Michael in recognizably similar structural terms. named ranked, assigned to the light side forces, his adversary named, his office precisely located within a hierarchy of celestial commanders. Not an isolated invention, but a preserved and intensified apocalyptic tradition. Two different textual moments, one repeated structure. And here is what the tradition rarely preserved. The word Archangel appears in the New Testament and in later Christian theological development as the primary descriptor of Michael's rank. It is a real word with a real etymology. Archie, chief, and angelos, messenger. And it gestures toward high rank. Later tradition often made that rank feel like singular supremacy. The commander, the leader, the one at the top. That portrait is not a distortion. It is a simplification that resolved a hierarchy into a single apex figure, rather than preserving the structure the texts actually describe. What the word does not carry is any of the specificity that Daniel and the War Scroll preserve. The named office. The 3-week delay in which a figure required Michael's help. The hierarchy of chief princes, each assigned a named adversary, each operating within a structured cosmological system. The unnamed radiant figure who appears before Michael is mentioned, and whose identity the text declines to give. The ranked contender who is one of the chief princes, not the sole one. All of it, the precision, the hierarchy, the honest complexity of a system in which even Michael operates as reinforcement rather than apex, compressed into a title that gestures toward high rank, and which later tradition often made feel like singular supremacy. Daniel never explains why Michael specifically, what it is about his rank or his nature that makes him the one sent to resolve the deadlock in the Prince of Persia's resistance. The text does not say. It names the outcome and moves on. What it leaves behind is a portrait of a celestial hierarchy in which human empires have angelic counterparts, in which those counterparts contend with each other in a register. Daniel's vision briefly opens and then closes, and in which Michael's function is not conquest, but intervention, arriving at a point of resistance to enforce what should not be resisted. What popular tradition retained is the sword and the victory. What it lost is the 3-week delay, the unnamed figure who required backup, and the hierarchy of princes, whose existence the text assumes without explaining. Those losses are not random. They are the difference between an angel who wins and an angel who serves a structure older and more specific than winning. The texts that introduced Michael gave him a rank, a named adversary, an unnamed colleague who required his help, and a promise at the end of a vision he did not initiate, not a conqueror. A precisely positioned officer in a structure that the tradition collapsed into a single impressive title. What the title lost is what the texts preserved. And what the texts preserved is still there, waiting to be read.